Long before that fateful evening, I sensed something was amiss, but I kept convincing myself it was merely a phase. Picture this: sitting across a table from someone you love, someone with whom you've shared countless memories, and suddenly it feels as though you're strangers. That was my reality on Thursday night at 8:12 p.m., seated at the oak dining table we had purchased together 6 years prior. I was desperately clinging to something that clearly wanted to slip away. The meal consisted of warm salmon, rice, and roasted vegetables, which I had prepared myself, a Thursday ritual I had always upheld. She used to cherish that about me, often smiling as she perched on the kitchen counter, playfully telling me how attractive I looked in an apron. Yet tonight, she didn't even glance at the plate. Instead, she scrolled through her phone, its glow illuminating her face like a cold flashlight in the dark. Not a single word had escaped her lips since we sat down. Clearing my throat gently, I ventured, "You had a long day. Just try to start with something. Anything." She didn't look up, merely mumbling as her fingers danced across the screen, engrossed in whatever captivated her more than me. Her eyes bore an empty, distant look. Not anger, just a haunting absence, as if she were already living a different life while I remained a ghost haunting our shared space. I tried again, more softly this time. "Everything all right?" Finally, she set her phone down, but not to engage. She pushed the food around on her plate, as if it had offended her, sighed and replied, "I'm just tired." There was no eye contact, no warmth, only a curt tone that struck deeper than any shout, drenched in apathy. Attempting to lighten the atmosphere, I reached across the table slowly, cautiously, as if handling something delicate, and placed my hand over hers. In that moment, she jerked her hand back so quickly, it felt as though I had burned her. "Don't," she snapped. I froze, and for a fleeting second, her gaze met mine. Her eyes were not soft but rather cold and flat like glass. "Don't touch me tonight," she whispered, barely audible, as if she wished those words to dissipate into the air between us. I remained silent, nodding as I forced myself to continue eating, even as her words pierced through me like daggers. Inside, I felt something shatter, not only from her rejection but from the long-awaited confirmation of my fears. I had sensed the growing distance for months, the absence of morning kisses, her body turned away at the edge of the bed, and conversations reduced to mere checklists rather than genuine connections. Now, she couldn't even tolerate my touch. It was humiliating to have my own wife recoil from my hand as if it were a burden to be avoided. After dinner, she retreated to the bedroom without a glance in my direction. I lingered at the table for what felt like an eternity, staring at the empty chair across from me, feeling like a fool, a man clinging to a love that had already clocked out long ago. I finally got up and washed the dishes in silence. She didn't say good night, didn't inquire about my day, didn't seem to care, and sleep eluded me. So I left the house. It was nearly midnight, and I walked aimlessly through the quiet neighborhood, past flickering street lamps, inhaling the scent of cold pavement and distant fireplaces. I passed the house with the porch swing where we once sat together during the early days, when she would lean on my shoulder, sharing everything and nothing. Her laughter used to echo down the street. Now, I couldn't recall the last time I had heard her laugh, at least not in my presence. I strolled past the cafe where we had our first fight, only to make up 2 hours later with kisses and apologies. Back then she fought for us. Now she wouldn't even engage. As I walked, memories played through my mind like a melancholy slideshow. She used to wait for me by the door after work. Now she was in bed before I even took off my shoes. She would kiss me on the neck after dinner, play with my fingers and tell me I smelled good. Now she flinched when I brushed against her arm. She used to whisper "I love you" with such tenderness that it made me feel like the only man in the world. Now the only whisper I heard was "Don't touch me tonight," resonating louder than any scream. I think that night, amidst the cold sidewalks and dim lights, I stopped being her husband, not in a legal sense but emotionally. Something within me closed off, not out of anger but sheer exhaustion. I was weary of begging for scraps of connection, tired of pretending this marriage was anything more than a polite arrangement. I didn't cry or rage. I simply stopped hoping. And that was far worse, for hope is what keeps a man striving. But when hope fades, when you realize the woman beside you would rather be anywhere else, you cease to fight and begin to prepare your silent exit. When I returned home, the house felt colder than the night air. She was either asleep or pretending to be. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her back turned away from me, her hair tied up, her breathing shallow, no indication that I still existed in her world. Climbing into bed without a word, I turned away from her and quietly whispered my own goodbye. Not with drama, but a solemn promise to myself. This would be the last night I begged for love. Tomorrow I would disappear. That night I barely slept, lying there with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, listening to the suffocating silence between us. It felt like being buried alive next to someone who didn't even notice my struggle for air. At some point, around 4:30 a.m., I got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake a stranger. I stood at the foot of the bed, observing her curled up and facing the wall, wrapped in her favorite blanket, the one I had given her for our 3rd anniversary. She looked serene, as if nothing were wrong, oblivious to the fact that she had pushed her husband 1 inch closer to the edge of despair the night before. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just that our marriage had ended. It was that the woman I loved, the one who beamed when I walked through the door, who danced barefoot with me in the kitchen, who told me I made her feel safe, no longer existed. Perhaps she had changed, or perhaps I had. Life may have worn us down, I couldn't say. But whatever this was, it wasn't love, not anymore. Strangely, I felt no anger. I didn't feel rage or betrayal. Instead, I experienced something colder yet clearer: relief. It was a sorrowful kind of liberation, akin to shedding a heavy coat I hadn't realized I had been wearing for years. I walked over to the closet, opened a drawer, and retrieved a small duffel bag I hadn't used since our last trip to the lake, back when we still touched each other without it feeling forced. I packed slowly and quietly. A few shirts, a pair of jeans, my toothbrush, phone charger, wallet, and passport, just the essentials. I wasn't in a rush. I felt calm, more at peace than I had been in months. I entered the kitchen and sat at the table, the same one where she had pulled her hand away from mine the previous night, the same table that now felt colder than steel. I grabbed a sticky note from the drawer and wrote 4 simple words. Take care of yourself. That was it. No goodbye, no dramatic closure, no please. Just finality. I placed the note where I knew she would find it, then took one last look around the house. Every picture on the wall felt like a lie. Smiling faces frozen in time, pretending that love never fades. I considered taking the framed photo of our wedding but decided against it. I stared at it for a moment and walked out. The sun had yet to rise, and the world was still quiet as I walked away from the life I had built with her, carrying nothing but a small bag and a weary soul. I wasn't sure where I was headed. I just drove. No music, no destination, only silence and the road. At one point, I parked outside a 24-hour diner, sitting in the lot, staring at the steering wheel for what felt like an hour. Eventually, I restarted the car and continued driving. I eventually checked into a cheap roadside motel on the outskirts of town. $42 a night. It smelled of mildew and poor choices, but the clerk at the desk didn't ask questions, and that sufficed for me. The room contained 1 lamp, 1 chair, and a bed that creaked if you breathed too hard. I dropped my bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and just breathed. I felt hollow and empty, but not broken. It was peculiar. I always believed that leaving would be a grand, dramatic affair that would hurt so profoundly I would crumble. I thought I would feel guilty, doubtful, or longing, but that wasn't the case. I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from perfection, but the kind that arises when you finally stop lying to yourself. I wasn't happy, but I was honest, and sometimes that is the first step toward something better. That day, I didn't return calls or check messages. I simply turned my phone off and let the world continue spinning without me. I sat in that motel room, gazing at the ceiling, sipping burnt coffee from the vending machine, reflecting on everything I had given to that woman. The emotional labor, the patience, the small sacrifices, the money, the nights spent listening to her fears, the years I carried both of us when she refused to carry anything. I came to the realization that she wasn't the villain in my story, but I also refused to be the victim any longer. Later that evening, I drove to my friend Eric's house. He had a detached garage he used as a workshop. Not wanting to delve into details, I simply asked, "Mind if I crash here for a few nights?" He looked at me for a moment, as if the expression on my face conveyed more than words ever could, and then nodded. "Mikasa man, you already know." I tossed my bag onto the floor and reclined on an old sofa covered in paint stains. For the first time in a long while, I actually slept. No nightmares, no tossing and turning, no waking up to silence beside a woman who wished I weren't there. Just sleep. I had no plan, no apartment lined up, no next move. Just a small bag, a weary heart, and a quiet determination to rebuild. For the first time in years, I felt like a man again. Not because I had left her, but because I had finally chosen myself. The first text arrived 3 days after I left. "Can we talk?" I saw it when I turned my phone back on. I stared at the screen for a few moments, feeling neither anger nor hope, just numbness. I didn't respond. I turned the phone off again and slid it back into the drawer. The next day she called 4 times. Then she called Eric. 2 days later, she showed up at his place unannounced, knocking on the front door as if she hadn't been the one to whisper, "Don't touch me tonight." I watched from the window in the garage as Eric opened the door. She looked worn, dark circles under her eyes, messy hair, a panicked tone in her voice. "Is he here?" she asked. Eric shook his head. "He's not ready to talk. You need to give him time." "I didn't mean it like that," she said, her voice cracking. "I was just tired. I didn't realize he would actually leave." Eric said little, merely crossing his arms and staring. She left in tears, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of something. Not satisfaction or victory, but clarity. She never anticipated I would walk away. She believed I would always be there, no matter how cold she became or how many nights I felt invisible beside her. She was mistaken. 2 weeks later I left town, moving 2 states over to a small apartment above a garage in a quiet neighborhood. I took a job in logistics, not glamorous, but it paid the bills. More importantly, nobody there knew me. I wasn't her husband. I was simply Jake, the new guy who kept to himself and showed up on time. I made a rule: no contact. I blocked her number and every social media platform. No explanations, no apologies, no temptation to be pulled back into a relationship where I had to beg to be seen. I had spent too many years trying to prove my worth to a woman who had already made her decision. Now I was proving it to myself. I joined a gym 2 blocks from my place. Initially, I despised it. My body was out of shape, and my confidence was shattered. Yet I persisted. Not to impress anyone or seek revenge, but to rebuild. To rebuild discipline, routine, and myself. I began waking up at 6 a.m., working out, showering, going to work, coming home, reading books, taking walks, and preparing meals for myself. Gradually, the noise in my head quieted. I became less reactive, less emotional, and more centered. I didn't talk much or share details about my past. At work, people referred to me as the calm guy, the one who didn't get rattled, the one who always appeared to have something on his mind but never let it show. This was the opposite of who I had been. In the past, I had tried to fix everything. If she was upset, I dropped everything to chase her emotions. If she was distant, I overcompensated with flowers and soft dinners. I walked on eggshells in my own marriage, trying to hold it together while she let it unravel. Now I didn't chase anything. Over time, pain transformed into distance, and distance morphed into indifference. I stopped thinking about her, stopped wondering what she was doing, who she was with, or what she was feeling. She became like a song I once loved but no longer played. Not out of hatred, but because it no longer resonated with who I had become. Almost exactly a year later, I encountered her again. I was in the city for a work conference, waiting for coffee at a small cafe downtown. I didn't see her at first, but she saw me. As I stood in line, I heard a soft voice call my name from behind. "Jake." I turned around. She looked different. Not negatively, just older and more tired, as if life had taken its toll. Wearing a beige coat, her hair up and makeup faded. Her eyes sparkled with surprise and relief upon seeing me. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You look." Her sentence trailed off as she stared. I nodded once. "Hey." She stepped closer. "I've been trying to find you for months. I didn't know if you were okay." "I'm good," I replied, simple, calm, honest, not cold. "You look amazing," she said, almost in disbelief. "You've changed." I smiled politely. "Yeah, I guess I have." A heavy pause lingered, as if she wished to say something significant. Perhaps everything, perhaps nothing. "I never stopped thinking about you," she finally admitted, her voice quivering. "What I said that night. I didn't mean it. I was overwhelmed." I gently raised my hand, signaling her to stop. "You don't have to explain." She blinked, her gaze dropping and then rising again, eyes glistening. I made a mistake." He nodded. "We both did." Looking down and then back up, she asked, "Is there any chance we could talk?" "Just talk." I checked my watch. My coffee was ready. I grabbed it and met her gaze one last time. "You take care of yourself," I said, then turned and walked away. No anger, no bitterness. Just a man who had already said his goodbye long ago. As I stepped out into the sunlit street, coffee in hand, the wind brushing against my jawline, I realized something profound. I hadn't left her to hurt her. I had left to save myself. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's becoming the man you were meant to be in silence, with dignity, far away from the person who made you feel small. She lost me the moment she whispered, "Don't touch me tonight," and I found myself the moment I whispered back, "Goodbye."